excited for this conversation, continuation of a set of conversations we've done recently, talking about safety, talking about youth sports and the overall youth sports experience. So excited to welcome you all here today. I'm Jeremy Goldberg. I am the president, co-founder, and technically president and quarterback at LeagueApps, and excited to really shepherd this conversation with some incredible speakers to really kind of navigate what is an essential conversation. And I also want to just give a shout out to Anchored that has collaborated with us in highlighting the issues of safety and putting together today's webinar as well. And I'm also excited to welcome in a new teammate in Kate Katey, because as Kate will talk more about, LeagueApps announced the news within the past couple of weeks that we've acquired an incredible company called NCSI, which is one of the leading providers of background checks and safety solutions for the youth sports ecosystem. They work with about 48 of the 53 national governing bodies. And I've learned a lot about safety from Kate and her team as well. And if I wanted to frame the conversation today and how we're coming at it, we had a conversation a number of weeks ago looking at this issue of safety, looking at the issue of the youth sports experience from the lens of the parent and what parents are expecting and how you navigate parents, how you deal with parents. And now I think we're going to go a ladder up and look at the coach. And then the coach ultimately is part of an organization, and that will be the kind of final part of the series. But the reason why I think today's conversation is so important when we talk about the coach is that they're the delivery mechanism of the youth sports experience, right? That ultimately that coach is the one that links the organization and the way that organization wants to operate, the standards, the expectations, the values, the cultures, the programmings, with the actual experience that the families and the kids have on the field. And if you think about that coach and that delivery mechanism, you think about how essential that role plays, because it is the leverage point to think about safety and experience. If you get it wrong, right, if you don't have the right coach, right, all of the benefits that we talk about with sports tied to individual transformation or collective transformation are not realized. If you get it really wrong, and there's something that ultimately impacts the safety and the experience of those kids, then in many cases that may be an irrecoverable mistake or challenge for your organization, right? There's the moral aspect of harm that may have been done to someone in your community that was trusted, but more importantly, and I should say, as importantly, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're not going to be able to impact other kids, right? Because of the liability, because of the risk, because of the reputation. And so this moral dimension, the legal dimension, the risk dimension are all connected together by getting that coaching hire right. But that is a necessary but insufficient step to the entirety experience, right? You got to make sure you don't have the wrong people that are coaching and working in your organization. And then ultimately, you want to have the right people in your organization that are ultimately going to deliver those great experiences. And as an organizational leader, you're trying to put them in the right position as well. So today, we're going to come at this conversation in a couple different levels. And I'm going to start with Kate and NCSI, because that's basically starting to make sure that you do the right thing from the very beginning, right? That you put yourself in a position that allows you to have a great experience because you mitigate any risk of having the terrible negative ones. And when we think about safety, Kate, and excited to welcome you, excited to welcome the NCSI team as part of the LeagueApps family. And I've learned so much and been inspired so much in the time that we spent together. When we think about this idea of safety in youth sports and coaching, what are all the different dimensions of safety if you were to kind of break that down? And when we get into the applications of this with the next part of the panel, but maybe just give us an overview of what are the different dimensions of safety we should be thinking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's great to be here and so excited to officially be a member of the team and NCSI joining this fantastic family and to be a part of this conversation too. And as you put so well, the coach is representing your brand. The coach is having that direct interaction with the athlete. And when so many of us, we think about our experience growing up in sport, when I see my daughter growing up and participating in sport, it's not the association to the logo is important in what you wear on your jersey, but you think about those interactions you had with the coach, and that shapes your experience so much. And so, to your question, when you think about safety and how we should, really break that down, it's about bringing in coaches that are going to live up to your brand, that are going to live and breathe this aspect of athletes at the forefront, and that every decision that you make is always done in the best interest of the athlete. Policies, procedures, compliance, it all sounds like paperwork, right? But these things exist for a reason. They exist to create an environment where our coaches are held to a standard, Standards are consistent, they're clear, they're talked about. Parents can believe in those standards. And then equally, that translates down to an athlete that knows that their coach and their program is making decisions that ensure they have the right support from a coach, that these are coaches they're proud to have leading the youth, and that they feel safe. Safe is a very, very broad term to say. They feel physically safe, mentally safe, that they feel they have a good relationship with the coach that has the right level of boundaries. So it's a very complex conversation, but a lot of times when we look at it from the perspective of being a screening provider in the space, it's exactly what you said. It's the first step you do before someone ever hits the field, before they're ever on a roster. And there's a whole long tail of things that we're going to get into today that you have to continue to live and breathe beyond that first step. But we very much see ourselves in NCSI at day one in that process.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And it seems like that when we talk about safety, there's looking back, which is I guess what a background check is about. And then there's a question of looking forward. Maybe talk about that kind of continuum a little bit as we
Mhm.
think about this question of safety and the intersection it has with coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Background screening itself looks at your past, right? I think this is where we have to break down what does that mean and how do I implement that within my program? There's a misconception to think that risk would only exist before somebody hits your roster. So it's not a one and done activity. It's not a single event. It's an ongoing initiative that you embrace and that you create policy around within your program. Because we all might want to think and hope that risk only exists before somebody would join the program. But circumstances change, people change. And as operators of these programs, it's unrealistic to burden that responsibility that things would not change and evolve over time. Risk profiles, circumstances, all of that evolve. So the practice of background screening has to be an ongoing, it's something that you embrace within your program that is very much not a one and done. And when you do that, you also create a significant culture shift within your program. It sets a standard. It makes it very clear that you have consistency, ongoing measures to continue to provide the safest experience possible. Not that you just check before someone joins your program, but you continue to hold them to a bar throughout their time participating in coaching.
Yeah, and I think we definitely know obviously background checks helps you catch past behavior or things that have happened. Things like training help you prevent things moving forward. And the policies and procedures help you ultimately respond to it, right? So the connectivity of all these things I think are so essential. And one thing I think about this conversation is, you can hear these conversations and these labels of safety, compliance, and background checks. And I think part of it is how do we start to demystify this to help organizations understand things that I've learned and appreciated as I've spent more time learning and understanding this. So the first thing is that when we think about this assumption of safety, we think about the idea, well, we did a background check, we're good, right? But not all background checks are created equally. And there's questions that I think if you don't ask, may have an impact down the road, depending on what it is you're looking for and how you're going about it. So can you explain like how do people think about background checks and what's the most relevant things that any youth sports leader should really understand, especially when it comes to making sure they have the right coaches on the field?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are running a program, um, uh, you should absolutely be able to know what is actually being searched in the background screen that you're running on your coaches. And it's, it is an interesting question to ask, administrators of programs, organizers of programs, to see, is that something that's common knowledge within your program? Do you actually know what service that you're getting? And it's an area where NCSI strives to do a lot of education and really demystifying that not all background screens are created equal. And it would be ideal. This topic would be much simpler if there was a single source of truth that was always updated with relevant factual information that we could all pull from at any given point in time to view criminal activity convictions on people who are looking to be coaches. But that does not exist. There is not a single database. There is not one source of truth. And so you have to really understand what components are included in your background screening program. Are you just getting something that's fast and instant, or are you getting something that's comprehensive and looks at local records as well, that searches multiple address histories? And that is where you really start to see a difference in what you receive back as an administrator in terms of what we refer to as flagged results, which I like to think of as more of I'm working now with information as an administrator to determine what am I comfortable with, right? We as NCSI, we want to give you that information. We want to source as much information as possible, not to tell you what's acceptable or not, but to make sure that you're in a position to work with all of that information and choose your level of care within your program. We've done some case studies on this, and NCSI has found that in our comprehensive screens that there's about 46% more information provided back when you include local records. And Jeremy, what's kind of interesting about this, and it's a scary statistic, 46%, it's not traffic tickets in that 46%. It's not misdemeanors. We're talking about egregious crimes or crimes against children. It is a vast variety of information there.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to understand and ask the questions within your organization. What are we actually performing today? And is it including all the information that we want? Um, Saving a couple of dollars on the front end and potentially missing really critical information, ultimately, long term, you would have been better off doing it right the first time around.
Yeah. What maybe last thread, and then we'll push this conversation forward with the additional panelists. When you think about there's an assumption of safety that I think a lot of parents make that may not be certainly supported by the statistics. I heard some number, I think by U.S. Center for Safe Sport, that 1 in 9 children that have experienced youth sports experience some kind of sexual misconduct, sexual misbehavior, or sexual abuse, which is just absolutely stunning to kind of think about that. If you think about a team of 10 people, right, a team of 10 players, the idea that one person on that team might be impacted, when you look holistically across sports, is a pretty scary stat. When you think about the risk of what's out there, like what is the percentage where you find that there tends to be issues, so that I think people understand the likelihood of a potential issue if they're looking for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's a scary statistic, and it's something that we NCSI, we're in this space. We see, screens come in, day out, thousands and thousands of screens. And look, I wholeheartedly believe, and I played sports growing up, and I have two kids, and my oldest is, in sport, and I wholeheartedly believe that 99% of the people who are looking to coach are doing it for the right reasons. Like that's why this conversation exists, to continue to attract the right coaches and make sport great. They're representing your organization and they're pouring into our kids. It's a really important thing to get right. Um, but at NCSI, I also see this different side of sport where there is a percentage of the ecosystem that sport does create its vulnerability. And someone who is looking to target the ability to be close to youth, to abuse that position of power, can look to find a position where they're in an authority role as a coach, and to use that, in a way that ultimately leads to those statistics. We tend to see that anywhere between 2 and 3% of the screens that we run result in, like we said, those flagged screens, ultimately sourcing records back to an organization. 2 and 3%. Um, I don't think you could put any, you could tell me it's 0.5%, and would still say, there's an athlete at the other end of that, and let's source that information so that an administrator can work with that and do the right thing. But 2 to 3% is a pretty high percentage that you would typically be receiving back in flagged results, and then you can make that determination from there. But that's ultimately our goal, is to continue to source that information and put an organization in power to decide their level of care.
As we transition to the panel, I guess one last thing is just we ultimately look at this and see the lens that the operators and how they approach it. It's things are complicated and hard, right? We don't make safety necessarily easy. Sometimes that's because of technology and systems, different standards. Sometimes that's because of changing governance and rules. Like for example, I think in Florida they've recently changed some rules, and that has a big impact on what every organization should be doing. Maybe just give one quick example of that, because it helps understand how organizations also need to stay on top of this so that they can then approach the right way to kind of staffing and managing their organization.
Yeah, 100%. It's a big reason why we're so dedicated to the space of sport, because as a background screening provider, we spend a ton of time following local legislation, change in requirements, what you need to follow as organizations when you have, change in requirements such as the FDLE level two that you're referencing in Florida. We spend a lot of time focused on that because we want to help be a source of information to our partners who ultimately maybe just raise their hand and are volunteering and helping run their program. But that does not mean you need to take on the burden of following legislative changes and navigating risk alone. So it's a big area where we try to focus and provide that education downstream and help organizations navigate.
Yeah, and things like Florida where everyone has to get fingerprinted, right, as of July
Absolutely.
1st and manage that and then report that. Just one example of complexity that exists elsewhere. Kate, I appreciate you being here, and we're going to pull you back in for the Q&A and discussion. And if anyone's listening wants to ask questions, I know we got a few questions in advance. You can click that Q&A button or and surface those or share that to some of the League Apps email that we received earlier. But I'm going to ask at this point for Jason and Katey and Mike to join the conversation, come off video, come off and put their video on, and we'll continue the dialogue here. And excited to welcome these incredible folks to the conversation, and build on the conversation that Kate and I just had. So I'm going to start by maybe grounding it in the specific expertise of the people we have here, and then really navigate a conversation so that practically we can kind of unpack this idea of coaching and how it links to both safety and the overall experience and what organizations should be thinking about. So I'm going to start with you, Jason Sachs, a longtime friend of mine, and maybe share a little bit about yourself and also what Positive Coaching Alliance is. So we understand kind of the lens that you're bringing into this conversation, leading such an incredible national nonprofit to this idea of coaches as this critical determinant of the youth sports experience, both safety and also the quality of it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jeremy. It's great, an important conversation. As you mentioned, my name is Jason Sachs. I'm the CEO of Positive Coaching Alliance. We are a national nonprofit organization, and we believe that all kids deserve access to a positive youth sports experience, regardless of their social or economic circumstance. And oftentimes, one individual can make or break that experience, and that comes down to the coach. So we partner with grassroots organizations. We partner with national governing bodies and national organizations to help them train their coaches in positive youth development, because at the end of the day, creating an environment where kids feel safe, seen, heard, and valued is the most important thing that will lead them to a positive youth sports experience.
That's great, Jason. Excited to have you for the conversation. Mike Juels, another a new friend of mine that I spent some time with. Been inspired by you, and I think you bring two lenses to this conversation. You're an incredibly successful, have been an incredibly successful coach, and knows what great coaching looks like. And you also run an incredible company called GameBreaker that's leading the way when it comes to safety and the advocacy for safety, and obviously a lot of the equipment and apparel that you're making. So maybe Mike, share a little bit about your background and the lens you bring to this conversation of coaching and the intersection it has with safety.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. Appreciate being here and great to sit alongside some great voices and definitely a very important conversation. I think rather than tell you all about who I am and what we do and how we do it, I think more importantly for this conversation, I think everything um, that we really deal with, bottom line, all of us, is that we believe that players, coaches, families, parents ultimately are going to be making choices based on trust, right? Their most valuable asset is their children. And trust is one of the few things kind of in life that, can't be demanded, right? It can't be purchased. It can't be inherited. It's got to be earned. And once it's earned, it's got to continue to be earned. So, we believe that that trust isn't built in an extraordinary moment. Rather, it's built in an ordinary moment, right? Kind of one decision, one promise, one conversation, one answer, right? So, um, what I think we really bring to the space is trying to normalize those ordinary decisions and making safety a part of that conversation and putting it at the forefront, whether it's the background checks or all the things that the other panelists are talking to, or whether it's the whole ecosystem, whether it's on the field safety, off the field safety, recovery, nutrition, recovery, et cetera, et cetera. So while we sell products, it's really not what it is. It's more what it does and what it provides. At the end of the day, we see ourselves as a participation agency, helping leagues and organizers and operators earn trust with those families and continue to earn it every day by doing ordinary things, which is
Yeah.
creating a culture of player safety in and around those athletes.
Yeah, and I like that framework of the ordinary things that actually create that culture. And last but not least, we're gonna have Katey Crouse join the conversation, because ultimately all this conversation has to be translated through organizational leaders that are able to drive and develop coaches and run their organizations and navigate both safety and the experiences that have to happen. So, Katey, I know you run a great organization called MVP Football out in the West Coast. Maybe share a little bit about your organization and what it does, and the passion you have when it comes to thinking about creating the right kind of safe and amazing experience in your programs.
Okay, so we are a flag football league out in the Southern California area. We have 17 different locations throughout Southern California, all the way up to down to San Diego, all the way up to the Inland Empire. So we are kindergarten through 8th grade, and we are boys and girls. We have a very strong girls division, but we also they play co-ed and everything. It's a great program. I've been with them for 4 years, but I've known the owners of this company for a long time, 15 years. My husband and I do a photography company where we go out to the leagues and we take their pictures and stuff. And that's how I got involved in them. My kids are grown, so I'm like, I'm itching to be out on the field again. I got to figure out a way to do this. So like, hey, I'll run a league for you if you want me to. And so I run my leagues a little bit different than some of the other commissioners in our league. I am more on a personal level because I'm a mom too, and I like to take that into my job as well. And these kids are my kids, and I when they hurt, I hurt, and it's just I can't even say enough about that. But so our program is we run 2 seasons a year, sometimes 3. As far as parents, they come, they sign up and whatever, and then we put them on teams and things like that. So it's just I can't say enough about this program. And how it runs
I love it.
really well. So
I love it. Well, and we're going to get into the specifics there.
Yes.
And especially bring your voice into the application of some of the ideas that we're going to talk about. Jason, Positive Coaching Alliance, I mean, in the name, positive coaching, maybe just start with the idea of what is it when we think about what the expectations of a coach are and how an organization should define what that expectations are. We can think about the idea of safety and what that means as part of that definition.
Mm-hmm.
And then also what are the other elements that go into the idea of what makes for a great coach, right? What obviously that we know what a bad coach looks like and how we prevent that, and
Yeah.
what's a great coach, and how do we think about all the different elements that really make that up as you think with the expertise of the PCA?
Yeah, there's a couple things I want to touch on there. I think when you say safety and a lot of the conversation that you and Kate were having on background checks, I think we sometimes forget or we don't focus necessarily on the child's psychological safety and the environment that is being created by coaches and that starts with the organization and like what the standards that organizations are committing to, which we can talk about later. But when it comes to the coach, right, the coach is really who is setting the culture of that team, so that when a child gets out of the car or gets off the train or bus and shows up to practice, what are they encountering, and are we creating an environment where where they feel connected, where they feel safe and seen and included in that in that practice or that game. And so I think the challenge becomes as our coaches, we're going out there and recruiting coaches, and in many leagues across the country, including my own here outside of Chicago, we get to a point where like we need more coaches, and a parent gets voluntold to coach and they show up, and many times we don't provide them any training. So we are hoping that they are going to show up and know what to do with a team of 15 individuals, but many cases they don't. They don't have any youth development experience. They don't have any coaching experience, whatever it might be. So PCA's goal is, how can we give them this framework, give them this model of what it means to be a good coach? And a lot of that comes down to, are we creating an environment where kids can thrive and succeed and they feel like themselves? And so a lot of PCA's training is focused on creating that connection and creating those environments and being really specific around what are the tools that a coach can use to do that. Because many of our coaches are volunteer coaches, right? And they have, this might be the fifth or sixth thing that they're worrying about that day. So they're also coming from work. They're hustling up. They're trying to figure out what their practice plan is going to be. And then when they show up, they are that person that the child is looking for direction from. And we need to make sure that we're equipping the coaches with tangible tools and resources that they can create this environment where kids can feel safe, seen, heard, and valued. Because once we get that experience, that creates connection. But at the end of the day, that also is a climate and a culture where kids can thrive. And so that's what we want, right, from our athletes when they're participating. We want them to have a good time, and we want them to continue to get better and improve. And at the end of the day, sure, like competition and winning is fun, but if we lay that groundwork, those results are going to come.
Yeah, Jason, I appreciate that, and I think a couple of things you're saying to reiterate, which is one, what is the most expansive definition of quote unquote safety, or how do we protect our players, right? There's things that you could think about in terms of the worst examples of abuse. There's physical safety, concussions, which we'll start to talk about with Mike, and the other kinds of physical risks. And then there's also emotional safety or psychological safety, and all of those dimensions come together. Because if you don't get any of that stuff right, none of the benefits from sports come, or none of the winning comes either, right? So, and we'll get in a little bit more about how you do that on those tools. But maybe, Mike, to bring you into the conversation on this, which is, if you think about like one thought I've started having the conversations we've had is the assumption of safety versus the reality of safety, and the gap that really exists. And if you think about the role of the coach and how is the coach operating, what is the gap that exists now between the conversation about safety that we're having, but actually the reality of the safety of experiences and the position that coaches are put in right now based on how our system operates?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's multiple conversations, right? There's, how you speak to a coach and how they entertain safety. What does it mean to them? Why is it important to them? Is it about, the best ability is availability? Is it about, having a holistic approach where they generally care about, their athletes and their safety, which I believe most do. That's why they're in the space to begin with. They're interested in helping children in their journey, not hurting them. I think a lot of times there's not an understanding of what really the dangers, what the pitfalls are, what can happen, why they're playing the sports that they love, and the unintended results of playing those games and what ends up happening. And, we've seen that obviously with American football, with participation issues, with, when the movie Concussion came out, what it did to kind of the sport of football and kind of changed the narrative. I think for us, we found that the coaching community is just a great place, and it's a place where they're really welcome to learn. And so we really spend a lot of our time, educating and just telling them, hey, like, here's what's happening, right? Girls flag football, for example, is booming, as we all know, and fastest growing sport, and states are, rapidly expanding and adding it as a sanctioned sport. And, it's blowing up. But, girls have a higher propensity to injuries, especially head injuries. Physiologically, they're obviously different than boys. Your daughter will concuss at a much higher rate than you. She'll concuss at a much higher rate than your son. And they are entering into a sport like flag football that's new for them. And, we think part of the reason they're entering into that new sport is because they trust it. Going back to that trust conversation, they believe that it's a safer atmosphere than maybe a sport that they're coming from that's having a lot of problems in and around head injuries, i.e., women's soccer. I don't know if that's true yet, right? The surveillance just started in 2026. They're just now starting to track the epidemiology through these states that have sanctioned women's flag football. Um, but I'm afraid that, when that epidemiology does comes out, they're going to find out that the head injuries are definitely present and present at a high rate. And so we're trying to, not only protect the players, but protect the game. That's our motto. That's our tagline, right? Protect the player, protect the game. And we believe if we don't do that, that ultimately this game that's booming and growing real fast will immediately stall out. And parents will be like, wait a minute, I thought this was a safer alternative to the other sports they were playing, and it really isn't. So I think just educating the coaches overall on kind of what is happening, giving them the information they need to make informed, educated decisions based on evidence, not based on maybe their own perception or what they've seen or what they haven't seen, right? And so I think that's the biggest step.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Katie, bring you into this dialogue, and maybe you can lean forward a little bit. You're a little blurred, but maybe that'll solve as we can see you or eliminate the blur from the conversation. And but Katie, a question for you is, when you think about your organization, how do you think about what your parents' expectations are? You mentioned being a mom and the mindset you try to bring, but what is the expectation that your parents have related to safety, related to coach training? Related to the experience that you're providing to kids holistically, and then we could talk a little bit about how you try to meet that expectation.
So, as far as parents with the coaches, so we have a unique situation where we allow parents to request a coach if they want, and so that comes in with the trust, where these parents trust these coaches and they know their coaching style and everything, so they'll drop their kids off and do that stuff with that. Safety issues on our thing, we do some training with them. We offer out all kinds of resources for them to read and give us any questions that they want. But as far as parents, it's the trust thing. It really is. It's and trying to find a good coach. I mean, we haven't gone in how we choose our coaches in that. So once you hear our process on that, you might this conversation would be a little bit better.
Yeah, so why don't we do that? Why don't we talk a little bit about, because I was getting into the selection now. I mean, part of this is the training, but it starts with the selection. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about how you choose and select the coaches and the perspective you bring into that to deliver the outcomes you want.
So we have a registration. We register through you guys, and then there is a question on there that asks, are you willing to coach this season? And if you are, do you want to be a head coach or a assistant coach? And then with that, I take that and I look and I see how many kids we have on a team. If these coaches have been requested, so then I'll put the kids on the team that these parents have requested this coach. And then I go to them and I say, hey, you signed up to be a head coach. Are you still interested in doing that? Yes, I am. Okay, so then our next step is, okay, well, then you need to do your background check. And once you do your background check and it comes back, based on what we receive on that, is if I say, okay, you can go ahead and coach, or maybe we sit out this season, get some of your stuff cleared up on your background check, and then we revisit this in a future season. And then once that happens, then I start putting those teams together. Now, we get teams, what we call our orphan teams, that don't have coaches. And so that's where this process is not a fun thing, because then I have to go to the ones that say they want to be an assistant coach. And I said, okay, are you willing to be a head coach? And they're like, well, I don't really have the time. That's why I did the assistant coach. And then that's when I kind of say, okay, our league we have some requirements. Like, they can only practice twice a week before season starts. However long you want your practice, that's fine. That's up to you. Once season starts, they're only allowed to practice 1 day a week, and then they have a game on Friday. So logically, that is, our games are not even an hour. They're 40 minutes plus it's 50 minutes is what we carve out for a game. And then maybe an hour and a half practice. So that's maybe 2.5 hours a week commitment, right? They don't want to do that, but yet they'll sit at practice and watch the kids, or they'll sit at games and watch the kids. So then the next thing I do is I send out an email and I say, hey, we have this team put together. We need a parent step up. And that's where you,
Right.
what did you call it? Coaching, tiering, or whatever that word was.
Voluntold.
Yeah, voluntold that. So then I do that, and I send out an email and I say, hey, and it's a nice one. And it's like, okay,
But Katey, as you describe this process, I guess the ultimate question on my mind is, at the end of the day, there's a reason why they didn't want to do it, and ultimately you get them to do this. And so if you think about what we're discussing, is there's a lot that goes into coaching.
Yes.
We're going to get even more of that with Jason and Mike. So ultimately, what is the number one thing you can do to make a coach feel comfortable or supported so that they're willing to kind of sign up to take all this on?
Access to me is the access.
And why?
To me.
And let's go further. What the access to you? Why is that access to you so
Because
important?
I have found in the past that the more open and available I am to coaches, the more opt they are to want to come back and coach with us or coach with us in the first place. Now, you can have some commissioners that don't answer text messages right away or answer emails right away, and that is not a good thing when you have a coach on the fence that's like, okay, if they're not going to help give me the support I need, why would I want to help them out?
Yeah, it's such a good point, because basically what you're doing is you're showing to them that you have their back. You're going to put them in a position, and I think that is essential. And I think, to bring Jason back into this, and then Katey will go a little bit deeper on that in a second. I'm curious, Jason. One is there's obviously in a lot of countries around the world you have coaching as a profession. Right here, you have some people that are doing this full time. You have some people that Katey was just describing as a parent, where you got to coach and incent to be able to do that, or persuade or volunteer. Someone who's a flag football coach myself, I've gone through this journey, and I think we're asking coaches to do a lot, right? Like, you have emotional safety, you have physical safety, you got to worry about concussions, they got to go through this process, then they got to deliver this stuff. So how does an organization navigate that? Like, what is the secrets to putting coaches in the best position for success?
I think it starts with, I mean, it sounds really simple, but like, it starts with some expectation. And sometimes that can be as easy as a coach job description, right? Like, anybody listening to this webinar that has ever held a job, like, majority of the time, I'd say 99% of the time, you are getting a job description of what is expected of you and what your role should be. I think the majority of youth sports organizations do not have a job description for what their coach should be doing, right? It might have like, hey, there's one game a week, 2 practices, like, here's where you pick up the equipment, but what is your role as a coach and what does that look like? And I think that's where we're missing, right? Like, believe me, I wish every coach could get trained in positive youth development before they stepped out on that field, along with a background check and other important things that they need. But in worst case, like, we need a 1-page job description with expectations of this is what it means to be a coach. Because I think what happens, especially at the youngest ages, we are scrambling to get coaches, right? And so somebody might think they are actually doing the league and the team a favor by volunteering, but they have no idea, right? The way they think about coaching is how they played 20 years ago, what they're seeing on TV, and they're acting as if they're coaching like an NBA team when we're playing, 6 and 7-year-old basketball on an 8-foot rim. And it's like the score is 6-2, right? And it's sort of like, what are we doing? How are we equipping those people with tools and resources and specific expectations around this is your role for this team this season? And it's not, and for at PCA, we talk about, like, what is the environment you're creating? How are you communicating with kids? Like, how do you focus on effort-based things versus result-oriented? How are you greeting people when they come to the practice? Like, all those little things. How can we focus on effort versus, results? So those are the types of things we want to try to equip coaches with and give them specific tools they can use. How do we teach kids how to bounce back from mistakes, right? We talk about having a mistake ritual, all those types of things where it can start as something as easy as a coach job description with those expectations. And hopefully one of our goals is, how do we make it as easy as possible for coaches to access the training, right? So we do a lot of live workshops. We also have self-paced online courses. We partner with, organizations like LeagueApps. So it's like, hey, if you're signing up, do the background check, do the PCA training, and we know we have at least that baseline. Because what also is, unfortunate is, you could have one organization, and if they don't do coach training, the experience for a child could be completely different depending on who the coach is, right? So Our hope is that a PCA training or coach training will at least have a baseline for all your coaches, and your team knows, and your parents know, and the league knows what you're getting when your child signs up.
Yeah, that's Jason. I think that's great. I love this idea of the job description and setting those
Yeah.
expectations up, and what that looks like in that baseline um, to build upon. And I know there's a couple of questions coming in, so feel free to add some more into the Q&A tab. Mike, to bring you into this, we have this job. You have this question of selection, in which background checks come into the recruiting Katey was just describing. Then you've got this idea of the job description that's setting expectation. And then ultimately you got the culture that you're creating within your organization and for your coaches. And let's look at it through the lens of safety specifically. How do you think about what is it? How does an organization create a culture of safety? What is the role of the coach in that culture as well? Especially when we're talking about physical safety, which is something that I know you guys are in the center of with all the leadership and advocacy you're doing, tied to, especially to concussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason said a great word, and that's expectations, right? I think if you have a new coach and you have a job description for them and they look at that job description and they say, oh, I can do that. I think then maybe you set some expectations with your players and your families, right? I think early on you could have a meeting with kids in the front of the room and parents in the back, and you can ask the kids, like, you signed up to play whatever sport. What is your expectation? Like every kid could play. We could have the most fun we're ever going to have, and you're going to fall in love with the sport. We might not win every game, but we're going to have the greatest time in the world. Or do you want some of your friends that you're looking at to your right or your left to not play as much, and but we'll win some more games? And if the kids all raise their hand that they just want to have fun with their friends and fall in love with the sport, then it's hard for the parents to argue that, right? Standing in the back of the room. But their expectations might be different, right? And it might be different within their parents, right? Dad may want to win, and mom may want their child to be safe first and foremost. So you have to learn how to, set expectations, to Jason's point, but you also have to learn how to manage those expectations. When it comes to safety, I think that it has to be a part of the package. I think that you hear in youth sports a lot, I do it all for the kids, I do it all for the kids, I do it all for the kids. But I kind of challenge that quite a bit with teams and coaches and organizations. Like, put your money where your mouth is, really, because you're going to spend a bunch of money on a bunch of different things that have nothing to do with their long-term well-being or health. I'm going to challenge you to do that. Like, let's not make it optional. Let's not make it a parent's choice or a kid's choice. You don't ask your son or daughter to put themselves in a seatbelt when they get in the car. You tell them to, right? There's got to be grown-ups in the room. And we challenge coaches and organizations to be the grown-up in the room. And sometimes they don't like it. I think sometimes, profits get put ahead of protection. And, that's when, culture and trust define itself, right? Those are the moments that, where you're asked to sacrifice those things, and that's when you have to hold true to kind of what you believe in and keep
Yeah,
trying to earn that trust. So I think safety is got to be part of the uniform. It's got to be part of the package. It has to be the first thought, not an afterthought. It's got to be the first thing you consider when a kid signs up to play sport. We're going to run around and spend a fortune on uniforms and hoodies and cleats and gloves and sleeves and a bunch of things that really do nothing from a safety standpoint, right? And the last thing we talk about is, oh, well, should we provide head safety for them? Like, what are we talking about here? So,
yeah. I think it's right. And, Kitty, to get your perspective on this, I think about it as a parent, and, I've done PCA training, I've involved in youth sports. And so I'm not going to question playing time. I understand the role of the coach. I understand what the expectations are. But the only moment where I felt like I needed to say something was when watching a lacrosse game where a girl literally took a stick and just swung it at another kid that had nothing to do with the play, but literally physically looked like they were trying to injure it. And as a parent, it was like the line for me. Like, there was the one thing where I'm like, I can't, like, the ref didn't see it. Then there was like, ultimately they huddled that, she was out for a minute or two. And I went up to the coaches afterwards and I'm like, I've watched this play out of this girl seems really angry and it's dangerous. And I don't think it's safe right now if somebody's not trying to address it. And I watched the coach actually pull her out of the game and sit her down and talk to her. Because look, she's a young kid too. She's 9 years old, 10 years old, and I think about the idea of setting these expectations. And then if you're trying to do this with volunteer coaches, and particularly the people that you're voluntoling to do this, it's really raising the bar. So what's the secret here? How do you take these ideas of these expectations that you're setting, and how do you practically do that within your organization?
For me, you asking me that?
Yeah, Katey. Yeah.
How do we take that?
Do you have like a rule book, and like what's the way you memorialize these expectations?
So we have a rule book, of course, and we are constantly updating the rules to, as a parent, you see things happen in a game. Like you saw that girl hit the girl and it was not part of the play. In the rule book, they probably didn't have anything stating what to do in that situation. We wouldn't. So it happened. Now, this season, we're going to have a rule in place for that. You hit a kid like that, you're going to get taken out of the game for however long. We do have in place that you get a warning, and then you get and then you'll get a penalty, and then you'll get ejection. And ejection, I've only had to eject a couple kids for things, and that is a 1-game suspension. And then they get talked to, and they get, hey, let's not do this again. When you're dealing with kindergarten to 8th graders, your 8th grader kids are a little bit, they know, but the kindergartners, like, they wouldn't know if they
Right.
said something wrong or whatever. So we do have in place where we do keep the safety there. Like, they get warned, and then they get the penalty, and then they get ejected, and then if it continues, then they get another ejection, then they're out for 2 games, and then they get to where they can't come back at all for the rest of the season, and then we look at it for the following season. And this goes for players, parents, and coaches. Like, we have it set up for, if a parent's mouthing off on the sidelines to a referee or mouthing off to a coach or something, then they get penalized too. That team will get penalized, and they get ejected. And I've had to eject a few parents too.
Yeah, but it sounds like what you're doing is, I mean, part of it's one thing to have expectations, but part of expectations then is enforcing them, right?
Yes.
And delivering on those things and being
Yes.
willing to have the tough conversations and tough decisions.
And I'm gonna tell you, I'm a woman in a man's world, and I've had to establish myself so that these coaches respect things. But I do stand on the sideline, and I am watching them, and I keep a strong eye on these people, and I'm going from game to game. There's a point where I sit in the middle of all 4 of our games, and I'm watching it, and I am keeping an eye on this. And these coaches know, and the referees know, that I have the kids' backs on this or whatever. I am their line of defense there, and I will, if I see something in a game and a referee doesn't see it, I will call timeout and say, hey,
Yeah.
keep an eye on this.
I think that standard of excellence is critical. So I want to open it up to some questions we're getting in. I'm going to ask Kate to rejoin us as well, and maybe start with with you, Jason. There's an interesting question here of, fundamentally, how is it that how do you actually know that investing in coaching matters? Like what we're describing, if you're looking at it through the lens of an organization's success, and let's assume that the organizations which we believe are ultimately trying to do the right thing. But then there's a question of, like, I got a lot of things I got to juggle. What's the return on the investment in coaching? How much of a difference does it make if you're going to make the case of why this is so critical, particularly around enrollment or retention, reputation, which is the question that came in?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what's been discussed already is like the overall, at the end of the day, the most important thing is the experience for the child. And I think if they have a great experience, they are going to come back next year, right? And so how do we create that great experience? It's investing in our coaches and the experience that the kids will have. So that training is so important. So you will see that return on that investment. Also, I think one of the challenges in recruiting coaches often will be the fact that being a coach is very intimidating, especially for people that have never coached before. So, what are you doing as an organization to set the expectation, define what it means to be a coach, provide training and support to volunteer parents or whomever might be coaching? Because some people might think like, oh, like I'm helping. We're running a girls flag football league here in my town. It's our second year. Like we are looking for coaches, but I think a lot of parents say, "Well, I never played football, so I can't coach." And it's like, well, you don't necessarily need to know how to play tackle football to play flag football. We're going to go through a training. We're going to set you up. We'll set you up with a mentor. We'll give you a playbook. Then people might say, hey, you know what? Like I can grab a friend and we'll do this. So I think there's a couple things. What that then does, you're also creating a pipeline for your coaches, because
Yeah.
each year it's so much time that you're trying to spend to recruit coaches, train them. So if you can create that pipeline, not only of kids coming back, but also coaching coming back, and then people hear what a great experience is, and more people start to come in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I am curious, Katey, but a quick sample. What percentage of the coaches in your flag program, especially the girls program, are dads versus moms?
I would say probably 80% dads, 20% moms. I
Yeah.
encourage moms all the time. And you're right. You don't have to necessarily know the sport to coach it. We'd have all the tools for that. I am always looking for more women to get out there to coach
Yeah.
because they bring the girls with them too. And the
Mhm.
girls see a female coach, then we're going to get more
Yep.
girls to sign up to play too. It's like it's kind of a
Yeah.
win-win.
I think we would solve a lot of these issues if we had more women as
Oh,
coaches and more moms as coaches.
I
So let's just
agree with
start
you
as
on
that.
that
Is
one.
that that's the best solution we have? And as soon as the assistant coach to an amazing woman, and Coach Lisa, for the shout out the sixth grade girls flag football team in Pennsylvania. It's I see the difference, right? And you,
Oh,
and the dynamics
Mhm.
there in particular. Yeah, Kate, there's a question that came in from Haley about this dynamic of, well, they're recruiting coaches after registration closes, but because they didn't have enough volunteers, but then they have to figure out how to do background checks, so they lose valuable practice time in terms of why they're clearing. How do you suggest organizations navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question to ask. And I look at it very much of work backwards, right? So asking your background screening provider, how long does it take? What does that look like, right? Roughly 3 to 5 business days should be about how long a good quality screen is going to take you. So you work backwards from there. And if this is the first practice, then tranching that back. First practice, when you need coaches signed up, again, knowing registration happens prior to that. So it's very similar in a lot of ways of like thinking about when you're hired for a job and that process of you accept the offer and then you do all the new hire forms and then you're cleared on day one. And getting ready for a season feels very similar to that of working backwards. And everyone is a lot of people we work with are following that same suit that you're describing of first you're getting the athletes signed up, you're gauging interest, and then you're setting a benchmark up front of here's when we're going to have our coaches registered by, and then we're going to give ourselves this week for more of the administrative part, getting everybody cleared, letting those coaches know again up front when you sign up, and we're so glad you're here, we wanted you to quickly follow up and submit that form in. So having a clear timeline, working with your provider up front to ask those questions on turnaround time so that you know how to prepare for that first practice.
And it seems like if you do a lot of these things we're talking about, you're going to retain more of your coaches or make it easier to attract them so that you won't be as jammed up as we heard. I want to go around maybe for some last comments here, integrating some of these questions. I'll start with you, Mike. One is you said something interesting before, which is if you make kind of safety optional, right? It's like it's one thing to say, hey, your hoodie's optional, right? The extra, hat is optional. But at the end of the day, the uniform is not optional. Talk to me about like where organizations may get it wrong when they think about optionality and safety, and what should be the best practice of how they're thinking about things, especially in areas that you focus on.
I missed the first part of that, but I'll assume
Like,
that was
uh,
directed towards
yeah,
me.
yeah, but yeah, it's just the whole thing is about just the idea of optionality of safety versus mandatory, and what is the way? How do organizations get themselves in trouble if they say, "Hey, parents could do what they want," versus actually making a determination on something like headgear?
Yeah, I think obviously we have leagues all over the country, all over the world that are requiring product and not allowing it to be optional. We believe that is the way to go for a lot of different reasons. But I think GameBreaker, we not only invented the product, but we pioneered the market. That's a little different, right? And so when you pioneer a market, you don't really get the privilege of living up to someone else's expectations, right? You kind of have the responsibility of establishing them. And I would say that, like, if we talk about flag football, for example, and the people on this panel, right? They're pioneers, right? Flag football. If you're in the flag football business today, you are pioneering that market. And so, you know, when you talk about standards, right? Um, there's no roadmap. There was no accepted standards. We saw that there was, we basically had a belief that athletes deserved a better answer than what they were getting today. So we created something. And while creating
Yeah.
something new is exciting, kind of living
Yeah.
with the responsibility of that is something different. So I think these operators, you know, they're not only
Yeah.
protecting the sport, they're not only protecting their children, they're protecting their assets, right? We name them additionally insured. They're layered with, you know, $12 million worth of product liability insurance that lays over the top of their league. We do everything we can to encourage a league to
Yeah.
require equipment and make it part of the uniform package or the kit, if
Yeah.
you will, and to not even make it optional and just make it a part of the sport. I think there's a responsibility to do that.
Yeah.
And
So,
there's no
so
good reason not to do it.
yeah, I think you laid up well. As we get away here, I'm going to give everyone one sentence of advice to an operator on this question of safety. I know we just heard Mike's perspective, but go to you first, Katey. Which one sentence of advice you have for people that are running an organization that are trying to put coaches in the right position?
One. um,
How about this? Just talk to Katey. That's the best advice I got.
yeah, just talk to me. Just come.
There you go.
I'm your line of. I'm there for you. I have your back. That's all. And I think the main thing is to have a person like that in an organization that these
I
coaches
love it.
can go to.
I love it. Kate, what's your piece of advice to operators as we get away here?
Absolutely. I would say be consistent, talk about your expectations, not just to your coaches, but to your parents as well.
And Jason, last
Yeah,
but not least.
expectations and over communication.
Yeah, I love it. And I want to thank everyone here, everyone, MVP Football, Positive Coaching Alliance, GameBreaker, and NCSI, all incredible organizations. I know we're privileged to have connectivity to all of you from a LeagueApps perspective. And I'll end with this idea that Dwight Eisenhower had, there's this matrix of making urgent versus important decisions. And we spend a lot of time in the urgent stuff, right? The things that are right in front of us, but the not urgent and important is the thing that really makes the difference of getting important things right. This issue of safety, this issue of putting coaches in the right position, sometimes doesn't feel urgent until you have a problem and it takes up all your time. But if you spend the time doing the right things up front, you'll deliver a better experience for everybody. So thank you all. Appreciate everyone listening. Excited to continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.